They drill asystole, means death into you in emergency medicine. On a Sunday night around 2, the bedside ECG flatlined and kept its tone. The patient was awake and pink. I am the senior emergency physician on nights at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, long past the point where alarms make me jump. In late November, the department lives on machines. Triage tablets, oxygen blenders, syringe pumps, and the cardiac monitors that set the pace of every hour. The rule is simple and hard. Flatline on more than one lead, no pulse, no cardiac sounds, no respirations you don't make yourself. We teach it to students. We practice it in drills. We sign our names under it. Handover had been quiet by night standards. Resus had 3 beds active, a sepsis workup on broad-spectrum antibiotics, a fractured neck of femur waiting for a bed upstairs, and a cluster headache patient under oxygen. The charge nurse read back incoming calls. One ambulance was 3 minutes out, lights on, reported as collapse in the street, female, midlife, no pulse on first contact, bag valve ventilated en route. The radio added a line that didn't fit the template. Patient alert with simple responses, skin warm, oxygen saturation normal on supplemental flow. The crew could not reconcile the readings and asked for resus on arrival. We prepped bed 4. The defib trolley sat where it always does, pads checked, suction catheter coiled, fluids spiked and primed. I put on a lead apron out of habit. With any chance of chest imaging, we end up there. The clock above the doors clicked over in its even steps. You get used to time as a series of small marks, not long stretches. The trolley burst through with the ambulance crew already narrating to the nurse recorder. No voices were raised. We don't do drama in resus. Movement is its own language. One paramedic slid the patient to our bed, while the other held up a hard case about the size of cabin luggage with 2 thick tubes disappearing under the blanket at the chest. The case hissed in short bursts. Its screen showed pressure numbers in 2 columns and a small waveform like a square pulse. The paramedic said the essentials without quotes. Found on pavement, complaining of sudden lightheadedness. Then stillness and a faraway look. Monitor at scene would not capture a rhythm. Hands warm, no palpable pulse. Capillary refill fast. Oxygen saturation high on mask. Machine attached to her chest from arrival. We moved as we were trained. Nurse to airway, nurse to monitoring, medic to access. I took the left side and put my stethoscope to the chest. More for the record than expectation. There were no heart sounds. Lungs were clear. The bag at the foot pumped a steady count into the mask, and the chest rose. The bedside monitor took the ECG leads. The line came up flat and stayed flat. The asystole alarm chose a steady tone and held it. The printer spat out a strip to give the machine's verdict physical form. The patient tracked my hand with her eyes. She swallowed waterlessly. She squeezed the nurse's fingers on command. Her color stayed good. The oxygen saturation readout sat where we like it. Blood pressure cuff cycled and gave us nothing repeatable. We switched to a Doppler on the radial artery and heard a soft whoosh that came and went in short steps that matched the hiss of the hard case. There was no palpable pulse to count. I looked at the case again. It had a brand label I knew in passing. I have seen ventricular assist devices, mostly continuous flow pumps that take over for a failing left ventricle. They turn the circulation into a near steady stream that makes pulses vanish under the fingers. But this was not a left ventricular assist device. 2 thick pneumatic lines left the box and vanished under the dressings. The display named 2 sides and showed drive pressures for each, cycling like a metronome. There were tally marks on the screen's edge, alarm history, recorded without opinion. We clipped the leads to different positions and tried a second vector. The lines stayed flat. We changed the skin prep, rubbed with gauze, tried a third. The asystole tone did not change. The nurse recorder called out time points. I asked for a point-of-care ultrasound. If the electrical field stayed silent, I wanted to see what the mechanical world was doing. The probe slid under the rib margin. On a typical night, subcostal view shows a 4-chamber heart doing its work or failing at it. This view showed something else. A dense, uniform structure occupying the space where a heart would sit, with no contracting myocardium around it. The probe angle caught a gleam on a smooth surface and then the edge of a cuff. There was movement, but it was not muscle. It was the rhythmic expansion of diaphragms inside a device. Fluid moved in and out through conduit grafts that looked like bright cables on the screen. The great vessels were connected to it. There was no native heart tissue I could recognize. The make of the case settled it. This was a total artificial heart. The native ventricles had been removed and replaced with a pneumatically driven unit that sat in the chest, connected to the atria and the major vessels. The box at the bedside was not just a monitor, it was the patient's life. It pumped air down the lines to drive the internal diaphragms, which moved blood in a normal rhythm. It logged every beat and every alarm in silent print on its internal memory. In short, there was no heart to make electricity. The ECG saw what was true for it: silence. The circulation carried on because a machine was doing the mechanical work. The rule in my head buckled but did not break. Asystole means death, we are taught. When you are talking about a native heart and you have ruled out leads off, battery failure, and poor contact. Here, the ECG was irrelevant to perfusion because there was no myocardium to depolarize. The old rule had an unstated clause we do not say out loud. The rule applies only if a heart exists. We changed our priorities. The airway was fine. The patient moved air without help and the mask could come off for a trial. Oxygen saturation stayed where we wanted it. The Doppler signal kept time with the pump hiss. We set up an arterial line to get a continuous pressure trace. The line showed a clear, pulsatile waveform with a mean in the safe range. The patient's eyes stayed bright. She mouthed short sentences I did not repeat aloud. The nurse wrote them down without quotation marks. The report said she had felt the box alarm and then go quiet for a breath or two. Then restart. The alarm history on the drive matched that time window. One short, low-drive pressure alarm quickly cleared. We pulled the device manual from the case pocket. Every implanted pump arrives with its instructions, care cards, and contact numbers. The nurse called the National Transplant Center line and gave our location and the patient ID tag clipped to the case handle. The operator confirmed a name and device type and patched us to the on-call perfusionist. The perfusionist asked for the drive pressures, stroke volume setting, and battery level. We read them out. Nothing was read. The device clock put the alarm a few minutes before arrival. The perfusionist asked for the pump sounds. We held the phone near the exhaust. The evaluation concluded with a request to leave the settings unchanged and to monitor with arterial line and oxygen saturation until the surgical team arrived by road. I had the nurse copy the driver's event log down to paper. The log was brief and unemotional. Drive pressure transient low, auto recovery, alarm cleared by patient. It stamped time in its own way that I would come to recognize through the night. That log became our witness object, stubborn and precise. Small anomalies still pricked at the map in my head. The cuff blood pressure gave nonsense, then sense, then nonsense again. The arterial line trace was clear and regular. Yet the value drifted in a way that did not match the patient's calm face. The ECG kept its steady flat line, and the monitor refused to stop the tone until we turned the alarm off by hand. Nurses from other bays drifted in on instinct, drawn by the broken rule on the screen. Each one looked from the flat trace to the patient's eyes, and then to the box at the bedside. The room quieted as everyone resorted their categories. We did a basic lab panel. Phlebotomy from the arterial line yielded cleanly. The analyzer downstairs sent back a normal lactate, normal sodium, safe potassium. Hemoglobin was in the safe band. Gas analysis showed good oxygen and a normal carbon dioxide. There was no acid buildup. Perfusion was real. The device was doing its job. I have been in rooms where the protocol is a metronome you can set your pulse to. This was not that. The algorithm in my head had to be rewritten in plain language. Assess the airway, assess breathing, assess circulation. Here, circulation came from a machine that did not care what the ECG thought. We could not listen for heart sounds to tell us much. We had to trust the arterial line, the oxygen saturation, the capillary refill, the mental state, and the driver readouts. The transplant center called back to confirm that the patient was on their list for routine follow-up after an implant at a different hospital. She had been discharged with a portable driver, trained to manage battery swaps, taught to sit when she felt alarms, taught to call when the lights went yellow. She had, according to the nurse on the line, done everything right. We still had to ask why she had gone down on a city pavement. Blood sugar came back fine. Temperature was normal. The case had a spare battery in its side pocket. The battery in use showed good charge. The drive pressures were in the expected range for a person her size. The oxygen tank had plenty left. The lungs were clear. The cannula sites looked clean and dry. I ordered a chest radiograph at bedside. The film tech wheeled in the portable unit and lined the plate behind her back. The image printed with its familiar shades. You do not forget the first time you see a chest without a heart shadow. In its place sat a device shaped like two joined domes with conduits rising to the vessels. The sternotomy wires arced like stitched stitches. The rest of the thorax looked ordinary. There was room for lungs to do their work. There was no fluid that would explain a sudden faint. The nurse recorder looked up from the event sheet. She read back the timeline. Collapse reported at street level at about 2. Ambulance on scene within minutes. A systole on monitor throughout transport. Patient alert and perfusing. Arrival to Ressus just after 2. Arterial line established within minutes. Device log alarm at roughly the same time as collapse, resolved in seconds. No recurrence since. It should have ended there. Identify the device, confirm perfusion, call the specialists, transfer the patient. But the night had a seam I had not seen yet. The event log on the driver said one thing. The ECG and our instincts said something else. The symptom, sudden lightheadedness and a near fall, had no clear cause we could name. We followed the script to the last line. We documented. We stabilized. We waited for the surgical team to make the long drive in. The patient dozed without distress. The oxygen mask off now, nasal cannula in place, saturations steady. The driver case sat on a small stand, hose lines calm, small exhaust puffs stepping the minutes. The arterial line traced a patient waveform. The monitor's ECG stayed flat and silent, except for the tone we had disabled. But the flat line did not match the living person in the bed. The transplant team warned they were driving in from Glasgow. That gave us a window to turn the room into an audit site. We treated every device, line, and trace as a record to be read. First, Circulation. The arterial line stayed our anchor. It showed a regular waveform with a mean pressure that kept her awake and thinking. We zeroed it again at phlebostatic level, checked transducer height, flushed, and confirmed no damping. The waveform shape matched what a pneumatic total artificial heart produces. Quick upstroke, short plateau, clean downstroke, then the next. The oxygen saturation pleth trace followed in step, a soft rise and fall that matched the hiss of the driver case. Capillary refill stayed brisk. Skin was warm. Mentation was normal. Second, the ventilatory side. She breathed on her own without distress. The mask had already gone to nasal cannula. End tidal carbon dioxide on a nasal sampler tracked in the middle of the expected range. Blood gas a little after 2 showed oxygen and carbon dioxide within target. No acidosis. Lactate normal. We drew a second gas half an hour later for comparison. Again, normal. If there had been a true loss of pump output in the street, tissue chemistry had not paid a price. Third, the implant itself. The driver case became the focus. I pulled its manual out again and kept it open on the counter. The nurse recorder copied the event summary from the device screen onto our paper sheet line by line. Timestamp, code, short description. It read like a metronome with one skipped beat. A low drive pressure alert around the time of the street collapse. Auto recovered within seconds. No further alarms. Stroke volume setting was stable. Drive pressures for left and right were in their programmed bands. Battery state was good. The exhaust sounded even, a dry puff at each stroke. The case kept its own tally with no flourish. Imaging followed. The portable radiograph had already shown the device outline and clean lung fields. We did not see fluid, dislodgement, or a line that had migrated. To check cannula alignment at bedside, I repeated focused ultrasound. The atrial connections looked seated. I could see inflow cuffs and outflow grafts as bright lines. There was motion within the device chambers that matched the driver rhythm. The great vessels carried flow. No clot shadow appeared. Ultrasound cannot see everything inside a metal and polymer pump, but the gross view offered no culprit. We added labs to widen the net. Full blood count, kidney function, coagulation screen, electrolytes. Electrolytes came back calm. Hemoglobin was stable. Platelets were fine. Creatinine unremarkable. Coagulation within usual range for someone on anticoagulation management. Then the lab phoned a marker we had added almost by reflex. High sensitivity troponin. It was raised. Not a little. Raised enough that, in a standard patient, I would be looking for an infarct pattern on the ECG and planning a call to cardiology. Here, the ECG line was straight by design. The patient had no ventricles. The number did not fit the map. I ordered a repeat from a fresh draw to rule out a sample error. The second result echoed the first. Elevated. There are reasons troponin can climb without a textbook heart attack. Renal impairment, sepsis, pulmonary strain, even skeletal muscle injury with some assays. None matched what we were seeing at the bed. Lactate was normal, kidneys fine, lungs clear. The patient had no chest wall trauma except a healed sternotomy. She was not septic. The second lab contradiction joined the first. The ECG said death. The pressure trace and the eyes said life. Now the myocardial injury marker suggested damage in a patient without a heart muscle to injure. I wrote the line plain in the notes to keep my thinking simple. The marker belongs to tissue that is not here. It sat there in ink like a challenge. We kept logging the driver. The device recorded every cycle count, drive pressure, vacuum level, and alarm. The screen's event history had limited depth, but it held enough. Around the time of the street episode, a single low drive pressure alert. The wording was bland. It did not name a cause. It cleared itself. After that, no entries. The nurse recorder wrote each line with the time and the exact text, then added our own notes for context. The driver's clock and our wall clock matched within a minute by simple comparison. We wrote that down too. The transplant team arrived just after 3. They came with a perfusionist and a surgical registrar. Their first act was to verify identity. Patient tag on the driver handle, implant card in the case lid, name in the national database, all matched. They did their own read of the driver, pressures, stroke volumes, rates. They scrolled the event history and frowned only in concentration. They connected a service cable to the case and downloaded a deeper log into a handheld reader. That would give them second-by-second drive data we could not see on the bedside display. They performed a controlled driver check that required a short pause. The protocol is well rehearsed. Stand by the patient with oxygen, verify arterial waveform and mental status, confirm the backup driver is powered and set to identical settings, then switch the pneumatic lines from the primary to the backup in one smooth motion. The pause is meant to be a breath, not a gap. We prepared the room for that moment as if it were an intubation. Clear rolls, quiet, eyes on the patient and the arterial line. The perfusionist counted down without drama. Lines off, then on. The switch took a heartbeat. In that heartbeat, the driver log would show no stroke delivered. The arterial line behaved oddly. Instead of an immediate flat trace, the waveform made one more rise and fall. A single echo of pressure after flow should have stopped. It was small, but clear. The perfusionist nodded and called it what it likely was: elastic recoil in the circulation, a stored snap from the previous stroke. Plausible. Still, it placed a tiny seam in cause and effect. The driver recorded 0 delivery for that instant. The line showed one more small wave. I wrote the second contradiction plain. The record of no stroke did not match one more pulse on the trace. With the backup driver engaged, the device sounds and numbers were unchanged. The patient reported no new feeling in her chest or head. Arterial pressure remained steady. Oxygen saturation did not dip. The event we could not fully explain did not repeat. We moved to root cause thinking. Why had she felt lightheaded in the street? The driver log's low drive pressure alarm could fit a transient kink or obstruction in one pneumatic line, a brief battery contact issue, a blocked exhaust, or even her own position compressing something at the waist. The device manual lists those as possibilities with short resolution steps. Posture matters in portable systems. The paramedics noted she had been in a heavy winter coat, layers zipped tight against the November wind. The driver case had hung by her side on a strap. A simple mechanical squeeze where the lines run under clothing could be enough to drop drive pressure for a breath, trigger an alarm, then self-correct when she shifted. We tested what we could without risking harm. The perfusionist inspected the full length of the pneumatic lines for kinks, cracks, or moisture. None found. Connectors were clean. Filters were dry. The exhaust path was clear. The battery sockets were firm. They swapped in a fresh battery from the pocket regardless, a no-cost change. The driver firmware version matched the latest bulletin. They checked the strap length and how the case sat at her hip. With the coat off, nothing pressed the lines. With the coat on, a tight zip pulled fabric over the couplings. We wrote that observation down. It was not proof, it was a clue. The surgical registrar wanted imaging beyond a plain film to rule out thrombus or device migration. We arranged a CT angiogram of the chest with the transplant team present. Moving a patient with a total artificial heart and an external driver is a choreographed walk. The case goes on a wheeled stand. The lines coil without kink. A nurse holds the power supply. Another watches the battery level. We rolled through corridors at controlled speed. The CT gantry clock stamped the time in bright digits on its screen as the bed slid in. The scan protocol was adjusted to reduce metal artifact. Contrast delivered through the arterial line was obviously not possible, so we used a peripheral line placed carefully. The images came up in slices. They showed the expected device silhouette, the inflow and outflow grafts in their places. No large clot around the conduits, no dissection, no pericardial collection. There were streaks from the hardware that could hide small details, but nothing leapt out to blame. Back in Rhesus, the lab phoned the repeat troponin, still elevated. We sent a different cardiac marker by a second assay to check for cross-reactivity. That also came back high, though lower. The transplant registrar reminded me quietly, in the tone of a fact, that a total artificial heart patient still has atrial tissue. Atrial myocardium can release troponin under strain. The device's diaphragms can also cause shear that stresses blood cells and endothelium, raising markers without a focal infarct. In other words, the lab did not have to imply dead ventricle muscle. It could be a broader signal of stress in a system where flow is artificial. That explanation sat better than the first shock I felt when I saw the number. We added a head CT given the street collapse. The scan was clean. No bleed, no stroke. Glucose remained stable, electrolytes unchanged. The arterial line kept its steady song to the driver's hiss. By the time the clocks in Rhesus said late night sliding toward early morning, we had an evidence chain that did not point to a single villain. The driver's event log recorded a short, self-limited low-pressure event at the same time she went lightheaded. The portable radiograph and the CT showed the device where it should be. The arterial line documented continuous perfusion in the department and one extra small wave during the controlled driver swap. The labs said chemistry was stable except for a raised troponin, likely reflecting atrial or systemic stress rather than a classic infarct. The patient looked well and wanted food. I wrote the summary for the notes and for myself. The style we keep is spare. What we saw, what the machines recorded, what changed when we turned a knob, what did not. Then I added one more sentence to keep the shape of the night honest. The mapping between driver strokes and arterial waves took one step out of sync during the swap, and the first lab called a heart injury in a chest that holds no heart. Both statements are true. Both might have ordinary explanations. Both also carry a weight because they touch the rules we live by. The transplant registrar recommended admission under their team at the implant center for 48 hours of telemetry and device interrogation with full software tools, plus a wardrobe consult about driver line routing in winter clothing. They wanted to pull the deep log from the handheld reader into the central system and match it with our times, our arterial records, and the CT stamp. They asked us to print our entire Rhesus monitor archive to send with her. We did. The printer rolled out pages of waveforms and parameter lines, time running left to right in a steady march. The driver case, patient, and stack of paper turned into a compact box of evidence. We packaged the night into a transfer. The ambulance crew returned with a critical care vehicle. The driver case was secured to its dock. Fresh batteries were clipped on. The perfusionist rode along. The nurse recorder photocopied the event sheet and tucked the original into the packet. I signed the summary. I also wrote a short line to the duty manager. Monitor alarm settings in Resus do not fit patients with continuous flow or total artificial hearts. Policy review suggested. That line would become something more in the weeks ahead. I watched them wheel her out. The flat line on the empty bed's ECG still strobed its silent truth to no one, a screen without a patient. For a second, the room looked like a stage set with the actors gone. I shut the monitor down and the tone died. The ECG said death. The driver log said a brief stumble. The arterial line and the patient said life. And the troponin pointed at an organ that was not there. She left our department before dawn with the perfusionist at her side. Driver secured to a transport dock. Spare batteries clipped. Paperwork in a thick, clear wallet. I slept for a short stretch that morning and then called the implant center. The registrar there confirmed they had her on continuous telemetry and had pulled the deeper driver log into their system for second-by-second review. I wrote those notes into our incident file the same day, then waited for their formal summary. In early December, their report reached my inbox. The driver data showed a brief low drive pressure event on the street, length the time of a single missed stroke or two, followed by auto recovery without manual input. No further alarms. Their engineers saw no evidence of internal valve sticking, no moisture in the pneumatic lines, and no software fault. They listed posture and garment compression as the most likely triggers, with a plain recommendation: route lines under loose layers, fit the winter coat to avoid pressure at the couplings, and shorten the shoulder strap so the case rides higher on the hip. They replaced her strap and issued padded guides at the clinic. Telemetry in the ward was steady. The arterial line there matched the driver rhythm without gaps. They trended the high-sensitivity troponin. It fell over a day and returned to her personal baseline by the second day. They drew a second cardiac marker as cross-check. It followed the same curve. The center's conclusion was careful. The raised markers reflected atrial strain or shear stress in a fully mechanical circulation, not a focal infarct. They scheduled her for a routine follow-up and discharged her with written advice about clothing, cold weather, and line routing. Our own department work did not stop at the transfer. I reopened the Resus monitor archive and matched it against the times on the driver event sheet. One seam remained. During the controlled driver swap, the driver recorded no stroke for a single beat. Our arterial trace showed one small pressure wave after the swap began. The perfusionist had called it elastic recoil. I wanted more than a working label, so I sat with the biomedical engineer who services our transducers. We walked through the setup. The transducer height had been at phlebostatic level. The line had no bubbles when we zeroed. The flush was off. There was still room for a small, stored pressure release from the arteries or from the cuffed grafts at the device output. He added a second possibility I had not listed: tiny compliance in the driver diaphragms themselves that can release a fraction of volume as the lines change source. He could not prove it from our traces. Neither could I. We wrote it plainly into the file. A single discordant wave appeared during a planned pause, with plausible mechanical explanations, but no lab confirmation. Policy grew out of the file. Within the same month, we changed triage intake for any patient with a mechanical circulation. The wristband now carries a bright tag that says device-dependent circulation, no palpable pulse expected. Correlate with perfusion metrics. The Resus monitors gained a preset profile for total artificial hearts and continuous flow devices. In that mode, the asystole tone is suppressed by default, and the primary alarms are the arterial line, end-tidal carbon dioxide, oxygen saturation, and mental status checks. We put a simple sign above the bed when that profile is active. Look at the patient. not the ECG. The charge nurses introduced a winter routing check at arrival when cold weather starts. Coat off, line path inspected, strap height adjusted, spare guides issued from a small drawer next to the defibrillator trolley. None of this is clever. It is the work of sanding down the rough edges that hurt people. The hospital also added a line to our major incident and resus teaching. When the screen says flatline but the patient is awake, ask what is doing the pumping. We used her case in anonymized form for that session. We did not pass around the troponin number or the image with the missing heart shadow as curiosities. We treated them as data points in a map that needs updating. For me, the personal part was quieter. The night rewired one rule I had repeated for years. Asystole means death is true only in a chest with a heart. I had never said the second clause aloud before that shift. Now I say it every time I teach a student to trust what they can see and feel before they trust a single trace. I wrote an incident report the day after, not because harm had occurred, but because the system had a blind spot that produced unnecessary noise and risk. The duty manager thanked me in the bland way of hospitals. That was enough. My credibility did not suffer. If anything, the file helped set the change in motion. The unresolved part lingers, as it should. The extra arterial wave during the swap sits on my desk as a clipped strip. If it was stored pressure in the arteries or a small cough of volume from diaphragm compliance, we may never prove which. The troponin rise is explained to my satisfaction, but it connects to a larger question I cannot shake. In a body with a fully mechanical circulation, what should count as the primary signal of life in an emergency bay built around electrical traces? We have chosen pressure, oxygen, and mentation, and that choice works at the bedside. But our record systems, our alarms, and our instincts still weight the ECG more than they should for these patients. The witness that night, the driver log, does not speak our language. It prints quiet lines in its own time. We have to learn to read both. In late January, I saw her again. She came through the department as a planned review because the transplant team needed a bed for a night to adjust medication. The winter coat was loose at the waist. The lines ran under soft guides. The driver case rode higher. The asystole tone did not sound because the new profile cut it. Her oxygen stayed steady, her pressure trace was clean, and her driver logs were dull in the best way. She asked for tea and a biscuit. She left the next day without incident. I kept the clipped strip of the odd wave and the first printed asystole strip in a folder labeled Witness. I open it when I teach, or when I feel myself slipping into autopilot. The folder holds the flat line that lied and the small pulse that should not exist. They keep me honest. There was no miracle that night. The device worked. The system mostly worked. A person without a native heart lived because she and the team and a set of machines did their jobs. Still, the room has not quite gone quiet for me. The driver's hiss and the arterial beep sometimes run through my memory out of sync by a fraction. It is enough to remind me that the map is not the territory, and that our absolutes are often just rules with clauses we have not written yet.